Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. On the ballot this fall, voters will decide whether they support making Washington's mandatory long-term care program optional. Supporters of Initiative 2124 argue that the Washington Cares program is flawed, won't really cover the cost of long-term care, and shouldn't be forced onto workers in the state.
WaCares requires a continuous pay-in period of 10 years to be eligible for the promised benefit. So it excludes people who are nearing retirement, disabled workers who don't work enough hours to be eligible, and parents or caregivers who take time off of working to raise their family or care for a loved one. I-2124 simply offers workers a choice.
Opponents of the initiative argue that the state's long-term care program will be a lifeline for many families who don't have and can't afford other coverage, but warn that making it optional will trigger a chain of events that will cause Washington Cares to collapse.
I-2124 would take away long-term care benefit payments, leaving 3.9 million working people to pay out of pocket or turn to the private long-term care insurance market. If this initiative passes, more than half would likely have no or few coverage options, since private long-term care insurance companies routinely reject people with pre-existing conditions.
The program Washington Cares was created in 2019 with the passage of House Bill 1087. It's funded by a 0.58% payroll tax on gross wages. The program is mandatory for all workers in Washington, except for people who are self-employed, people who work for the federal government or a federally recognized tribe, people who work in Washington but live out of state, military spouses, and workers with temporary visas. There's a 10-year pay-in period to become fully vested and a $36,500 maximum total benefit adjusted for inflation. About 500,000 workers opted out of the program during the one-time opt-out window that closed at the end of 2022 by proving that they held private long-term care insurance. Initiative 2124 would make the long-term care program optional for everyone. Tonight we'll hear both sides of the debate with lawmakers on different sides of the initiative, starting with the opposition. Joining me now, Democratic State Representative Nicole Macri, a sponsor of the legislation that created Washington Cares and an opponent of Initiative 2124. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Representative Macri. Just to start us off here, what do you think is at stake with this vote coming up here in November?
Thanks, it's great to be here. I want to be clear. I think that this initiative poses a really grave challenge to us here in Washington State and our ability to meet the needs and the ability for families to meet the long-term care needs that we're facing today and we know will only grow in the future.
Supporters of the initiative, of the plan to make the long-term care program optional, say, if it's a great program, then why are you worried about making it optional? In terms of the mechanics of the program, why is the mandatory nature of the program so critical from your perspective?
Yeah, so it sounds innocuous the way the initiative is framed, that folks can opt in and opt out at any time. But the state actuary has actually analyzed 5 different scenarios. They put out a report earlier this year, and in every single one of those 5 scenarios, they determined that that I-2124 would bankrupt the program by 2027. And that has to do with the nature of how social insurance programs work. The concept, of course, is that everyone pays a little so that we all have access to the benefits if and when we need them. And the program was designed to ensure broad participation and a benefit level that would be meaningful to people in their ability to meet their long-term care needs. So there is a modest payroll deduction and a meaningful benefit. And so I-2124 just breaks that entire model and would bankrupt the program.
If we could talk a little bit about what the program as designed will do and what it could mean for families who access those funds at some point. There's a lifetime maximum benefit adjusted for inflation, but currently it's $36,500 to be paid once someone's fully vested. What will that purchase? How can that make a difference for families from your perspective?
Yeah, well, let's start with the facts of why the legislature even contemplated a program to address this need. We are facing really a crisis in long-term care. Most people don't have significant savings. In fact, more than a quarter of Americans have zero emergency savings. 40% of people struggle to just meet a $1,000 emergency expense, and less than a third of folks age 50 to 64 have saved anything at all for long-term care. And so we have for a long time in the legislature been talking about the need to prepare for the age wave. Well, we're in it now, meaning that there is a growing number of people who are older, who are seniors, who are retired or facing retirement and not prepared for long-term care. We know that Medicare does not cover long-term care expenses. And so back in 2013, 2014, the legislature grappled with this question about what was the best approach to assist families in meeting long-term care needs, and what was the best approach to address the growing projected impacts on the Medicaid program, which is a general fund program of the state. And in 2018, 2019, considered and then passed this long-term care program, the Washington Cares program. And as you mentioned, it will provide a benefit that is available to folks when they need long-term care. So it has a modest payroll deduction that 3.9 million workers are participating in the program now and paying into the program during their working years. And then at any time in their life that they need long-term care services, they can apply for the benefits.
Can I go back to just the $36,000
Yeah.
figure? What, as far as people, one of the arguments against the long-term care program, or maybe for making this program optional, has been that that $36,500 will not cover a year in a nursing home facility or that sort of thing. Is that what it's designed for?
No. So the program was never designed to predominantly cover nursing home care or facility-based care. It was designed to be a meaningful benefit for home care. $36,500 would cover about 4 hours a day of home care for about a year. The benefit is indexed to inflation, so anticipate in 20 years the benefit would be valued at about $60,000. It's also flexible, and so if folks have other needs that they would need to be covered, transportation, meal support, maybe modifications to their home. The concept for this benefit was really to try to keep people living at home and independently as long as possible. And again, people will be eligible for the benefit when they need it. So there is initial kind of vesting schedule. So folks need to be paying through payroll deduction for the first 3 years, but if they then need long-term care, they will be eligible for the benefit. It's important to note that 40% of people who need long-term care services are not over age 65.
As far as the argument, or let me rephrase this question, please. What's your response to the argument that the program, by virtue of being mandatory, takes away personal choice and limits people's ability to use some of that money that they earn to purchase their own coverage, for example? What about the private market? What about personal choice?
Yeah, so the private market, let's talk about that. The private market is a failed market, and that's well known and has been well studied. Now, insurance in general is not a failed tool, but the specific use of private insurance for long-term care has been found to not be sustainable. That's why we've seen the mass exodus over the last 20 years of companies writing plans specifically for long-term care. And that is because the vast majority of us, over 70% of folks over age 65, will need some kind of long-term care supports. And the challenge is when you have a product that everyone is going to expend without having a broad pool of participants in your insurance pool, it just doesn't pencil. So it doesn't pencil as a private market endeavor, which is why the WA Cares program was created.
Is there any other program design or any other promising legislation that might be a backup if the Washington Cares program does fold, or for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is the danger of I-2124, is that if it passes, then it will bankrupt the program, and the state and the legislature will be back at square one. And to the point that should we have free choice and should people choose to pay for long-term care, I want to be clear that the alternative to the WA Cares program, I think there are three alternatives. One is uncompensated care from family members. This disproportionately impacts women who are often forced to leave the workforce to care for people in their families. So that has a ripple effect on the economy, on small businesses, and on families, not just the individuals needing care. People can private pay for care, but as I previously said, most people do not have the savings, and typically only very wealthy people are prepared to meet their long-term care needs. Or people can attempt to get private long-term care insurance. It is extremely expensive, and unlike the WA Care program where people pay through modest payroll deduction, the average Washington worker about $300 a year. For a couple who seeks long-term care insurance in their mid-60s, usually costs between $6,000 and $9,000 per year, and that's a premium that often escalates and that folks need to pay until they make a claim. The example I use is my partner's dad. He had private long-term care insurance. He got it in his early 60s. He paid thousands of dollars every year until he made a claim when he was age 83 and needed some home care. And so he was paying all through his retired years on a fixed income exorbitantly high premiums. And so those are the alternatives. The other alternative, which will be the fallback, is the Medicaid program. How the Medicaid program works, which is our state's low-income insurance program, is people need to spend their way into poverty. They need to spend down their assets through private pay of long-term care, sell off their homes, and essentially be in deep poverty before they're eligible for Medicaid. So driving people into poverty to get their long-term care needs met is not in the interest of families and certainly not in the interest of taxpayers. So without the WA Cares program, we're all going to be paying because the Medicaid program will take up a bigger and bigger portion of the state budget.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much again, Representative Macri, from the No on 2124 campaign. We appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Up next, we'll hear from a supporter of Initiative 2124. Republican State Representative Chris Corry joins us after the break. Stay with us.
The American crew is in the lead now. The American crew is in front. It's very, very close. The United States wins with Italy second and Germany third, Great Britain fourth, and Hungary fifth, and not one vote length between the first five.
Joining me now is Republican State Representative Chris Corry, a supporter of I-2124. I should say, joining me remotely. Thank you very much for your time today, Representative.
Thanks for having me.
So to kick us off here, why do you support the initiative to make the state's long-term care program optional?
Well, fundamentally, I believe people should have the choice to enroll in this long-term care program or not. And there was at one point when the program was first rolled out that option, but it was a narrow window that we gave certain Washingtonians. And now for here on out in the program's existence, you won't be able to have that same choice. So fundamentally, I think people should be able to opt in to a long-term care program or not have long-term care or have a private option rather than being forced into a state-run program without their consent.
So supporters of the program who oppose the initiative make the argument that without a mandatory framework and enough a large enough pool of people paying in, there's no other option that's within the cost range most people in Washington can afford to have some form of long-term care coverage. So if the program were to fold, they would not have an affordable alternative, is the argument. What's your response to that?
Well, I fundamentally disagree. I think that long-term care insurance is important for some people, but not for everyone. And that is something that most people don't realize, is that the reason why long-term care insurance is not as, widely utilized is because it really depends on a variety of life circumstances as to why you would have that insurance. We do have a safety net. It's Medicaid in our state, and that safety net would continue to exist regardless of whether we continue to have a state-run long-term care program. But fundamentally, people who need care will have that care through Medicaid, and people who have, other financial means in order to pay for their long-term care, whether it's through their own private insurance or, through paying through their assets, will have that option as well.
So a 2023 Harvard study reported that roughly 88% of adults ages 75 and up in Seattle can't afford in-home care, while 70% of older adults in general will need access to long-term care services at some point. So not to belabor the point, but does that change the framing of this in any way, or do you think that the program itself is still unnecessary as far as a mandatory program?
Well, I think that, again, there's different ways that others would be able to access that, whether it's Medicaid or by other means. But that also brings up a really good point about the program itself. Proponents of the program, and thus, against the initiative, would argue that this program solves that problem, and it really doesn't. The amount of money that is capped and provided in this program is highly insufficient for a lot of those needs. So we're promising something that may not even meet those fundamental needs at $36,000. Also, you're talking about being forced to pay into it for your lifetime. If you're a young working person, you're going to arguably pay far more into it than you'll get out if you make it there. And on top of that, there are a variety of exclusions that you may not end up qualifying for long-term care that you thought you were in, because let's say you took a break because you were going to raise a family, or you took some time off within a 10-year period for any number of reasons. You now have to start at the beginning. So there's a variety of tricks and opt-outs in this program already that disqualifies people from getting care that I think ultimately is not enough if somebody is in that situation in the end.
If the program, the Washington Cares, were to fold, do you think there are other legislative options that might be worth considering, or that are even really on the table?
I think the best other option would be to continue to fund Medicaid and maybe increase Medicaid rates to ensure that the safety net is properly funded for those who ultimately need that option. The state has spent considerable money marketing a mandatory program, which concerns me as, not only as a legislator, but also a taxpayer, why the state would have to spend millions of dollars promoting a program that's mandatory. Another interesting point that I think your viewers would be interested to note was I actually took the language that the Washington Cares program has on their website about their coverages and how it's funded, and I actually stripped it of the Washington Cares logos. I sent it to the insurance commissioner's office and said, hey, is an insurance company allowed to run promotional materials like this? And I got an absolutely not. And when I informed them that it was Washington Cares, they responded back with, well, Washington Cares is actually not under the purview of the insurance commissioner because they don't set it up as an insurance program. But that's what we're advertising to people.
In terms of Medicaid, to go back to the sort of blanket safety net that's there, in order to access Medicaid funding, my understanding is you have to basically spin down into poverty, that's what Medicaid is designed for. So it's not like Medicare, which is health insurance for everyone over 65,
Correct.
I believe. But rather, only for once every other option's been exhausted. To some folks, that's extreme for something that many people are likely going to need. What's your perspective?
I guess my perspective would be, for me, that the primary area should be, using your own resources for your family if possible. And if there aren't those resources there, you have an option like Medicaid. I fully expect that when my parents are older and they need care, that we would use assets that they've built up to care for them as part of their planning. But for those who don't have those means or don't, have the ability to do that, that's why that option is there.
In terms of just the overall need for many people to have care, is this an issue that's close to your heart? I mean, if you referenced your parents, is this something that people can relate to? Can you relate to this personally, this issue of people needing some assistance as they age? And if so, kind of how does that inform your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had grandparents who've gone through long-term care, and I saw that, the planning and stress that my parents took upon them when they were dealing with those issues. And we worked through them. They had set up means to pay for that through some of the property and estate that my grandparents had picked up, which I thought was wholly appropriate. I get that there are people that don't have those means, which is why we have a safety net for them, and I want that to continue to be there and as solvent and robust a way as possible. But setting up a program that is in many ways, not going to meet those needs and will end up putting those people on Medicaid anyways, doesn't seem to me a smart plan for our state government. And I think most people in Washington State agree. If you've looked at not just the polling on that, but the initial response when the original long-term cares was passed, a majority of Washingtonians said, no, we don't want something like this in an advisory vote. And I think that shows that people don't feel like this is an important role for the state government to play and that they should, focus on other aspects.
In terms of the financial stability of the program, the opponents of the initiative say that allowing people to opt out will basically doom Washington Cares. What's your perspective on the financial viability of the program long term, with or without the vote on 2124 being successful?
I think this program has underlying structural issues regardless of this initiative. If you looked at the original studies, as I did when this was first passed into law in 2019, the actuary said you would have to increase rates. We essentially have kind of teaser rates now, but they have admitted that based on the current model, at the model they did at the time, that you would have to raise rates in order to keep the benefits in line. And that was before the opt-out, and the obviously the people that opted out are going to heavily impact, payments into that system. So you're talking about either bailouts, similar to what the states had to do with the paid family medical leave, or significantly increasing rates, which will take more money out of Washingtonians' pockets.
This program has some semblance to programs like the federal Social Security program. What's your perspective on government social safety net type programs? Although there are a lot of distinctions between those two as well. You mentioned Medicaid. Is this an area where the state should be involved?
With long-term care, no. I think like I said, we've got Medicare or Medicaid, excuse me. It's easy to get those two mixed up from time to time. We have Medicaid, we have a social safety net there, and I think that's the appropriate role for the government. It shouldn't be coming in with first dollar programs for long-term care. It's a laudable goal, but it's really something that isn't in the core functions of state government, is setting up mandatory programs for insurance like this that aren't actually even insurance, according to our insurance commissioner. That is really not where we should be focused as a state. So
we've got just about 30 seconds left. Anything I didn't bring up that you'd like to add, or just ways you could summarize your thoughts in closing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm voting yes because I don't feel like people should be forced to pay into a program like this. It really is a tax that does impact low and middle income workers more. We're talking about, up to, a full cart of groceries every year for the average family, if not more. And these rates are only going to go up with benefits that have a lot of loopholes. It's really not good for Washingtonians. And I think that, the yes vote is appropriate for this type of initiative.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much again. That's Republican State Representative Chris Corry. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
The Impact is available anytime online. All of our episodes are available at tvw.org. You can find us on Twitter for coverage updates at The Impact TVW. Thank you for watching, and please join us next week as our Election 2024 coverage continues. Have a great week.